The cobblestone streets of Blackmere glistened with the remnants of evening rain, reflecting the pale moonlight that struggled to penetrate the perpetual mist. Lamplighters moved through the narrow pathways, their long poles extending upward to ignite flames that cast more shadows than light. The town clung to the edge of civilization like a stubborn memory, neither prospering nor fading entirely, suspended in a twilight state of decay and endurance. In the mercantile district, one shop stood apart from the others, not by grandeur, for it possessed none, but by the desperate energy that seemed to pulse from within its weathered walls. The sign above the door, once proudly proclaiming Calderwood Fine Goods and Imports, now hung at an angle, the gilded lettering faded to a dull ochre. Inside, Bartholomew Calderwood hunched over his ledger, the quill in his trembling hand, scratching figures that refused to balance. His once fine clothes hung loosely on his frame, evidence of meals sacrificed to maintain appearances. The candle beside him guttered, sending shadows dancing across the columns of numbers that spelled his doom. 20,000 crowns, he whispered, the words emerging as a broken prayer. 20,000 crowns by the solstice, or everything is lost. A soft noise from the doorway connecting to the family's modest living quarters drew his attention. Eliza Calderwood stood watching her father, her slender frame silhouetted against the dim light behind her. At 19, she possessed a quiet beauty that seemed to belong to another world. Pale skin that had never known harsh sun, eyes of such deep violet they appeared black in certain light, and hair the color of midnight that fell in waves past her waist. "Father," she said, her voice gentle but not weak, "you should rest. Morning comes, regardless of how long you stare at those numbers." Bartholomew looked at his daughter and felt the familiar twin pangs of love and guilt. After his wife's death from the wasting sickness 5 years prior, Eliza had become both daughter and lady of the house, managing their diminishing resources with a quiet dignity that only intensified his shame. "Just a moment more, my dear. I'm close to a solution." The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. Eliza's eyes, too perceptive by half, lingered on the ledger. "The Frost Fair begins tomorrow. Perhaps our fortunes will turn." Bartholomew nodded mechanically. The annual Frost Fair had once been their most profitable time, when the aristocracy descended from their estates to purchase exotic goods for the long winter ahead. But that was before the trade routes became too dangerous, before the strange malady began claiming the ship crews, before competitors with deeper pockets and darker connections had squeezed him to the edge of ruin. "Indeed," he replied. "Now go to bed, child. Beauty requires rest." Only when he heard her bedroom door close did Bartholomew allow his facade to crumble. He pulled from beneath the ledger a letter bearing the seal of Baron Rothwell, his primary creditor. The terms were unambiguous: pay the debt by winter solstice, or forfeit not only the shop, but the modest townhouse attached to it, everything the Calderwoods had left in the world. Outside, the last lamplighter completed his rounds. The street fell into deeper shadow as a figure detached itself from the darkness of an alleyway. Tall and unnaturally still, it regarded the Calderwood establishment with eyes that reflected the lamplight like those of a predator. After a moment's contemplation, it melted back into the night, leaving nothing but a faint impression of cologne mingled with copper. The Frost Fair transformed Blackmere's central square into a temporary wonderland of white canvas tents and colourful banners that snapped in the biting wind. Merchants from the surrounding regions displayed their wares on tables draped with velvet, while performers entertained crowds bundled against the cold. The scent of roasted chestnuts and mulled wine competed with the underlying dampness that never quite left the air. Bartholomew had risen before dawn to secure a prime location near the square's centre, arranging his remaining inventory with careful precision to disguise how little remained. Small wooden boxes of spices from the Eastern Isles, the last 3 bottles of Syrian silk-infused perfume, a handful of intricate clockwork toys, the meager remnants of what had once been a thriving business. Eliza joined him as the first customers began to arrive, having donned her finest dress, a deep blue velvet that had been her mother's, carefully altered to fit her smaller frame. A silver pendant in the shape of a crescent moon, also her mother's, hung at her throat. The simplicity of her attire only emphasized her natural grace, drawing glances from passers-by. "Remember to smile, Father," she murmured, arranging a display of delicate glass ornaments. "Merchants who look desperate rarely make sales." Bartholomew attempted to heed her advice, but as the morning wore on, his hopes dimmed. The aristocracy seemed to pass by his stall without seeing it, drawn instead to his competitors with their fresher goods and confident demeanors. By midday, they had sold only 2 small jars of preserved citrus and a clockwork bird that had been gathering dust for over a year. "Perhaps the afternoon will be better," Eliza said, though her optimism sounded hollow even to her own ears. It was as the cathedral bells tolled 3 that everything changed. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd, followed by a strange hush. The throng of fairgoers parted like a receding tide, revealing a figure that seemed to command the very air around him. Lord Darius Vane moved through the Frost Fair with the fluid grace of a predator secure in its dominance. Tall and lean, he wore his wealth with careless elegance, a greatcoat of black wool lined with silver fox fur, boots of supple leather that made no sound on the cobblestones, and gloves of such fine material they appeared to be a second skin. His face possessed the kind of beauty that invited stares but discouraged approach. High cheekbones, a mouth that seemed perpetually on the verge of a cruel smile, and eyes of such pale grey they appeared almost colourless in certain light. He was not alone. 2 servants followed several paces behind, their expressions carefully neutral, their attire rich enough to mark them as belonging to a great house, but subdued enough not to draw attention from their master. "Lord Vane," Bartholomew breathed, his voice barely audible. "I didn't expect him to grace us with his presence this year." Eliza had never seen the nobleman up close. His estate, Ravenswood, lay several miles beyond the town limits, an ancient manor house surrounded by dense forest that few Blackmere residents had ever entered. Stories about Lord Vane circulated constantly, that he had made his immense fortune through mysterious dealings in foreign lands, that he emerged only after sunset, that livestock sometimes disappeared near his property. Some whispered that the Vane family had ruled the region long before official records began, their lineage stretching back to times when darker powers held sway over the land. What no one disputed was his wealth and influence. Even Baron Rothwell, who held the debts of half the town's merchants, treated Lord Vane with cautious deference. Eliza watched as the nobleman moved from stall to stall, occasionally pausing to examine an item before moving on without purchase. There was something distinctly unsettling about his inspection, not the entitled assessment of a wealthy customer, but the calculated evaluation of a collector identifying specimens. "He's coming this way," Bartholomew said, hastily straightening his cravat. Lord Vane's gaze swept over their modest display with the casual indifference of one accustomed to finer things. He was about to continue past when something caught his attention. His head turned slightly, not toward their merchandise, but toward Eliza. For a moment that stretched like eternity, their eyes met. Eliza felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. There was hunger in that gaze. Not the common hunger of men who sometimes looked at her in the street, but something older and infinitely more dangerous. Lord Vane approached their stall with unhurried steps. "Calderwood Imports," he said, his voice a rich baritone that carried the faintest accent of somewhere far older than Blackmere. "I believed your establishment to be on the verge of closure." Bartholomew bowed deeply, masking his shock that the nobleman knew his business affairs. "Your lordship honours us with your attention. We have encountered temporary difficulties, but I'm not interested in your difficulties," Lord Vane interrupted, his gaze never leaving Eliza. I'm interested in whether you still have connections to the southern archipelago. Bartholomew straightened, a spark of his old merchant's pride returning. Indeed, your lordship. Despite recent complications with shipping, I maintain correspondence with several trading houses in Port Malabar. Something like satisfaction flickered across Lord Vane's features. I require certain items of a delicate nature, items that cannot be entrusted to ordinary channels. I would be honored to assist, Bartholomew said, hope kindling in his voice. Come to Ravenswood tomorrow evening, Lord Vane said. We will discuss terms. His eyes finally shifted from Eliza to Bartholomew. Bring your daughter. I find business proceeds more pleasantly with civilized company. Without waiting for a response, he continued his circuit of the fair, leaving behind the scent of winter roses and something metallic that Eliza couldn't identify. Bartholomew grabbed her hand, his face transformed by desperate joy. Do you understand what this means? Lord Vane's patronage could save everything. His wealth is legendary. If he becomes our client, other nobles will follow. Eliza nodded, but unease coiled in her stomach. Why would he want me present for a business discussion? Perhaps he merely wishes to be courteous, Bartholomew suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. Regardless, we cannot afford to refuse. This may be our only chance. As Eliza helped close their stall at dusk, she found her thoughts returning to Lord Vane's gaze, the way it had assessed her, as if determining her value. She shivered, telling herself it was merely the evening chill. Ravenswood Manor emerged from the forest like a dark dream, its Gothic spires and weathered stone walls seeming to absorb the fading twilight rather than reflect it. The carriage Bartholomew had hired with their meagre fare earnings creaked to a halt before the imposing entrance, where two servants in sombre livery awaited. Eliza stepped down, clutching her worn cloak tightly around her shoulders. The journey through the dense woods had taken longer than expected, and the last rays of sun had disappeared behind the mountains, leaving the sky a deepening indigo canvas pricked with early stars. I've never seen it so close, she murmured, taking in the manor's intimidating facade. Gargoyles leered from rain-stained cornices, while ivy the color of dried blood clung to the lower walls. Windows like dark eyes watched their approach, a few illuminated by the golden glow of lamps within. Magnificent, isn't it? Bartholomew said, his voice hushed with reverence for the display of wealth and power before them. They say the original structure dates back 8 centuries. The servants led them through massive oak doors into an entrance hall that soared 3 stories upward, dominated by a chandelier that held dozens of candles, their light reflecting off crystal pendants to create dancing patterns on the marble floor. Tapestries depicting hunting scenes lined the walls, though the prey in these ancient weavings seemed strangely human in form, while the hunter's eyes contained an unnatural gleam reproduced with golden thread. Eliza had worn her finest dress, the same blue velvet from the fair, but in these surroundings she felt like a sparrow that had wandered into a peacock's domain. Her father, too, seemed diminished by the grandeur, his carefully brushed coat revealing its wear more starkly against the opulent backdrop. Lord Vane will receive you in the library, announced the taller of the 2 servants, a thin man with peculiarly pale skin. Please follow me. They were led through corridors lined with artwork that spanned centuries. Portraits of aristocratic figures who shared the same unsettling grey eyes as their host, landscapes of places that couldn't possibly exist in the known world, and strange abstract compositions that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. The library occupied the entire eastern wing of the manor's ground floor. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held thousands of volumes bound in leather of various hues, while a massive fireplace cast warm light across comfortable seating arrangements. The scent of old paper mingled with wood smoke and beeswax. Lord Vane stood by a reading table, examining an ancient tome bound in what looked disturbingly like human skin. He wore no coat this evening, only a white shirt of fine linen beneath a brocade waistcoat the color of burgundy wine. The simplicity of his attire somehow accentuated his otherworldly presence. "Mr. Calderwood," he said without looking up, "you are punctual. a quality I value." When he finally raised his eyes, they went directly to Eliza. "And Miss Calderwood, you bring a touch of grace to these old rooms." Eliza curtsied, keeping her eyes lowered as propriety demanded. "You honor us with your invitation, my lord." "Please be seated." Lord Vane indicated 2 chairs opposite his own by the fire. "We have much to discuss." As they settled into the offered seats, a servant appeared silently, with a tray bearing crystal glasses and a decanter of ruby-colored wine. "From my private reserves," Lord Vane explained as the servant poured. "A vintage from vineyards that no longer exist, cultivated on slopes that have since crumbled into the sea." Bartholomew accepted his glass with poorly concealed eagerness. "To your health, my lord, and to a prosperous association." Lord Vane's lips curved in what might have been amusement. "Indeed." His gaze returned to Eliza, who had merely touched the wine to her lips. "You find it not to your taste, Miss Calderwood?" "I seldom indulge, my lord," she replied softly. "A virtue in these indulgent times." He set aside his own untouched glass. "Now, to business. I require items from the southern archipelago, specifically from the Isle of Shadows." Bartholomew nearly choked on his wine. "The Isle of—" "My lord, that island is forbidden. The Imperial Navy has blockaded it since the plague year." "I am aware of the official position," Lord Vane said, his tone suggesting that such restrictions were meaningless to him. "I am also aware that certain captains navigate those waters regardless, for the right price. A price I am prepared to pay many times over." The merchant's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "What items would you be seeking, my lord?" "Black orchids that bloom only in moonlight, certain crystalline formations from the caves beneath the weeping cliffs, and texts, particular manuscripts held in the abandoned Temple of Eternal Night." Lord Vane's expression remained impassive. "Nothing dangerous, merely rare. Curiosities for my collection." Eliza watched her father's face transition from apprehension to calculation. The Isle of Shadows was indeed forbidden, rumored to harbor both disease and darker things since the mysterious plague that had decimated its population a generation ago. But the desperation in Bartholomew's eyes told her he was already finding ways to justify the risk. Such an undertaking would require substantial resources, Bartholomew said carefully. "Naturally." Lord Vane reached for a small chest on the side table, opening it to reveal gleaming gold coins. "Consider this a modest advance. 10,000 crowns, another 10 upon delivery of the items." Eliza watched her father's eyes widen at the sum, precisely the amount needed to clear their debts with Baron Rothwell, with enough remaining to restore their business. "Most generous, my lord," Bartholomew whispered, transfixed by the gold. "There is, however, one additional condition." Lord Vane's gaze shifted to Eliza, a predatory intensity entering his pale eyes. "While you undertake this commission, your daughter will remain here at Ravenswood as my guest. A guarantee of your commitment to our arrangement." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Eliza felt a coldness that penetrated deeper than flesh, reaching into her very soul. "My lord," Bartholomew stammered, "surely there is no need for such arrangements. My word as a merchant is worth precisely what the market determines," Lord Vane finished for him. "Currently that value appears rather diminished." He gestured to the chest. "Consider carefully, Mr. Calderwood. Your debts to Baron Rothwell come due at solstice, mere weeks away. These coins represent salvation for your family name and legacy. All I ask in return is your daughter's companionship until your return." In the silence that followed, Eliza could hear the ancient clock ticking in the corner, marking moments that suddenly felt precious and finite. She looked at her father and saw the conflict raging behind his eyes, love for his daughter warring with the crushing weight of debt and failure. "I cannot accept," Bartholomew finally said, though the words clearly pained him. "Eliza is all I have left of her mother. I cannot—" "I'll stay," Eliza interrupted, her voice surprisingly steady. Both men turned to her with expressions of shock. "Eliza, no," her father protested. "It's merely a few weeks," she said, meeting Lord Vane's gaze directly for the first time. Something flickered in those pale eyes, surprise perhaps or approval. "And I would be residing in one of the finest homes in the region as his lordship's guest. There is no impropriety in such an arrangement." Lord Vane's lips curved into a smile that transformed his face without warming it. "Your daughter possesses remarkable practicality, Mr. Calderwood, and courage, admirable qualities." Bartholomew looked stricken. "I cannot leave you here alone." "You won't be leaving me alone," Eliza said softly. "I'll be in Lord Vane's care." She turned to their host. "I assume I would be properly chaperoned, my lord? My housekeeper, Mrs. Harding, would attend to your needs," he confirmed. "You would have a suite in the East Wing with every comfort. My word as a gentleman that no harm would come to you under my roof." The promise hung in the air, oddly specific in its wording. Eliza felt the weight of unsaid things pressing down around them. "Then it's settled," she said, before her father could object further. "Father will accept your commission, and I shall remain as assurance of his return." Bartholomew looked as though he might still protest, but the gleam of gold caught his eye once more. 20,000 crowns, enough to save everything they had worked for, enough to secure Eliza's future beyond this temporary arrangement. "I shall require 3 weeks," he said finally, his voice hollow with defeat. "The journey is perilous this time of year." "Take what time you need," Lord Vane replied, closing the chest with a decisive snap. "Your daughter will be well cared for in your absence." As arrangements were finalized and documents signed, Eliza gazed into the depths of the fire, wondering at the bargain just struck. Her father would depart in the morning, sailing toward forbidden shores for treasures he didn't understand, while she would remain in this ancient house with a man whose hunger she had glimpsed but couldn't comprehend. Only later, as she was shown to her chambers, a suite of rooms more luxurious than anything she had ever inhabited, did Eliza notice something strange. The windows, though large, and offering a view of the moonlit forest, were secured with ornate iron latticework, too sturdy to be merely decorative. The beautiful door to her sitting room closed with a click that suggested a lock engaging from the outside. She was not just a guest, she was also a prisoner, and as she stood by the window, gazing out at the silver-touched landscape, Eliza sensed she was being watched. Turning toward the darker corner of the room, she caught a glimpse of Lord Vane's reflection in the mirror, though when she spun around, the room was empty. Only the faintest trace of cologne mingled with copper lingered in the air, and the disturbing certainty that her father had sold her to something far more dangerous than a mere nobleman. Eliza woke to the sound of rain pattering against the window panes, a gentle symphony that momentarily masked her circumstances. For one drowsy instant, she imagined herself back in her modest bedroom above the shop, with her father's footsteps creaking on the stairs as he prepared to open for the day's business. Then reality crystallized around her. The canopied bed with its silken sheets, the ornate furnishings that whispered of centuries of wealth, and the cold knowledge that her father was now leagues away, sailing toward the forbidden Isle of Shadows. 3 days had passed since Bartholomew's tearful departure. He had embraced her with desperate strength before Lord Vane's watchful gaze, pressing his pocket watch, her grandfather's legacy, into her palm with whispered assurances of his swift return. The gold had already been dispatched to Baron Rothwell, buying them time and ensuring the Calderwood name would not be immediately disgraced. Yet the victory felt hollow as Eliza watched her father's carriage disappear down the long, winding drive of Ravenswood Manor. Rising from the bed, she moved to the window. The rain transformed the formal gardens below into a glistening wonderland of silver droplets and muted colors. Ravenswood was beautiful in its Gothic splendor, she had to admit, a beauty like that of a venomous serpent, alluring and deadly in equal measure. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. Mrs. Harding entered, bearing a silver tray with breakfast and a pot of steaming chocolate. The housekeeper was a severe woman of indeterminate age, her grey hair pulled into a tight bun, her black dress immaculate despite the early hour. Her movements were precise and economical, betraying no wasted energy. "Good morning, Miss Calderwood," she said, setting the tray on a small table by the window. "I trust you slept well." "As well as can be expected," Eliza replied, noting that while Mrs. Harding's manner was impeccably polite, her pale blue eyes remained watchful and assessing. "Will Lord Vane be requiring my presence today?" The housekeeper's lips thinned slightly. "His lordship extends his regrets, but will be occupied with business matters until this evening. He invites you to dine with him at 8 o'clock. She gestured to a bell pull near the fireplace. "Ring should you require anything. The library is at your disposal, though certain sections remain private." After Mrs. Harding departed, Eliza picked at the exquisite breakfast. Fresh bread, preserves imported from exotic locations, delicate slices of fruit she couldn't name. Every meal at Ravenswood was a study in refined abundance. Yet she found her appetite diminishing with each passing day. The sensation of being watched never fully abated, even in the privacy of her chambers. She had seen little of Lord Vane since her arrival. He appeared at dinner each evening, engaging her in conversation that ranged from literature to philosophy, his knowledge spanning centuries as though he had lived through them. His manners were impeccable, his attention flattering in its intensity. Yet beneath the civilized veneer, Eliza sensed something ancient and hungry watching her through those pale grey eyes. Most disturbing were the moments when he seemed to forget to blink, staring at her with unnatural stillness until something, a servant's entrance perhaps, or a clock's chime, broke the spell. Then he would smile, a practiced expression that never reached his eyes, and continue as though nothing unusual had occurred. After breakfast, Eliza decided to explore the areas of the manor permitted to her. The corridors of Ravenswood were a labyrinth of wealth and history, the walls adorned with artwork spanning centuries. She noted that many of the older portraits featured subjects with the same distinctive pale eyes as Lord Vane. Ancestors, presumably, though the resemblance was uncannily strong across generations. The library beckoned with its promise of distraction. 2 stories of knowledge surrounded a central reading area where comfortable chairs faced the massive fireplace. Morning light filtered through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits. Eliza browsed the shelves, finding volumes in languages she recognized, and many she did not. Some books appeared so ancient, their bindings crumbled at the slightest touch. As she ventured deeper into the library's recesses, she noticed a section cordoned off by a velvet rope, the private collection Mrs. Harding had mentioned. Curiosity warred with caution as she approached. These must be the books Lord Vane valued most highly, perhaps containing clues to his mysterious nature. Glancing over her shoulder to ensure she was alone, Eliza stepped over the rope. The air felt different here, colder, with a faint metallic taste that reminded her of blood. The books in this section were bound in materials that made her skin crawl, leathers too fine to be animal, clasps made of bone and metals she couldn't identify, titles embossed in scripts that seemed to writhe subtly when viewed directly. One volume in particular drew her attention, a slim book bound in what appeared to be midnight blue velvet with silver filigree along its spine. Unlike the others, it seemed almost to invite her touch. Eliza reached for it, her fingertips brushing the soft covering. An interesting choice. She whirled around, heart hammering against her ribs. Lord Vane stood watching her, though she had heard no footsteps announcing his arrival. In daylight, he appeared even more otherworldly, his pallor not sickly but luminous, his features too perfect to be entirely human. "Forgive me," she stammered, withdrawing her hand. "I didn't mean to intrude upon your private collection." "Didn't you?" His tone held amusement rather than anger. He moved toward her with that peculiar grace she had noticed before, as though gravity affected him differently. Most would choose the gilded volumes with their promises of wealth or power, yet you selected the most modest book in the collection. He reached past her, his arm brushing hers as he retrieved the blue volume. The brief contact sent an unnatural chill through her body, as though his veins carried ice water rather than blood. "Histories of the Forgotten Houses," he translated, opening the book to reveal pages covered in flowing script. A chronicle of families that once ruled these lands before recorded history, bloodlines possessed of gifts that modern minds would call impossible. Eliza's scholarly curiosity momentarily overcame her fear. What sort of gifts? Lord Vane's eyes gleamed with something like approval. Longevity beyond mortal span, communion with forces beyond the veil, mastery over flesh and spirit. He closed the book with careful precision. The author was burned at the stake for heresy in 1648, though his observations were remarkably accurate. A heavy silence fell between them. Eliza sensed they were engaged in a conversation beneath the conversation, meanings hidden within seemingly casual words. "Why did you agree to stay?" he asked suddenly. "Your father would have refused my gold. He loves you too much to leave you willingly, even to save his precious business." The directness of the question caught her off guard. "Because I understood the nature of the bargain better than he did," she replied honestly. "You would have found another way to claim what you wanted, perhaps at greater cost to us both." Lord Vane's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his features, before settling back into careful neutrality. "Perceptive," he murmured. "Most humans see only what convention permits them to see. Most humans." The phrasing sent a shiver down Eliza's spine. "The Isle of Shadows," she said, gathering her courage. "What do you truly seek from that cursed place?" "Not mere curiosities for collection, I think." His smile was knife-sharp. "Directness deserves directness in return. I seek components for a ritual, one performed only once every century, when celestial alignments permit certain barriers to be traversed." "What kind of ritual?" Eliza pressed, aware she might be overstepping but unable to stop herself. Lord Vane studied her for a long moment, as though weighing how much to reveal. "One that will restore something lost long ago. The winter solstice approaches, Miss Calderwood, a night when the veil between worlds grows thin. With the proper preparations, doors long sealed may be reopened." Before she could question him further, a servant appeared at the library entrance, announcing that a visitor had arrived. Lord Vane's expression darkened momentarily. "We shall continue our conversation this evening," he said, returning the blue book to its place. "For now, I suggest you explore the portrait gallery. The history of Ravenswood might prove illuminating." After he departed, Eliza remained in the library, her thoughts whirling. Lord Vane had all but admitted to being something other than human, and to orchestrating her father's dangerous voyage for purposes far beyond mere collection. The ritual he described sounded ominous, yet he had spoken of it openly, almost as though testing her reaction. Following his suggestion, she made her way to the portrait gallery, a long corridor where generations of the Vane family gazed down from gilt frames. Moving chronologically, she noted that the earliest paintings dated from the 15th century, depicting men and women with the same distinctive features as her host. What struck her as odd, however, was not the family resemblance, but the recurrence of what appeared to be the same individual every few generations. A man identical to Lord Darius Vane, though bearing different names according to the small plaques beneath each portrait. "Remarkable likeness, isn't it?" came a voice from behind her. Eliza turned to find a young woman approximately her own age, dressed in the livery of Ravenswood's household staff. Unlike Mrs. Harding and the other servants Eliza had encountered, this girl's manner was open and her expression animated. "I'm Clara," she offered with a quick curtsy. "I've been assigned to assist with your wardrobe during your stay." "Pleased to meet you, Clara," Eliza replied, grateful for the appearance of someone who seemed genuinely warm. "Do you know anything about these portraits?" The resemblance between Lord Vane and his ancestors is unusually strong. Clara glanced nervously over her shoulder before lowering her voice. The old folks in town say it's not resemblance at all. They say it's the same man, returning generation after generation when his absence has been long enough for memories to fade. That's impossible, Eliza said, though a cold certainty was forming in her mind. Many impossible things happen at Ravenswood, Clara replied, her voice barely above a whisper now. The master keeps to himself mostly, but there are nights when strange lights appear in the North Tower, and sounds that cannot be explained echo through the halls, and visitors who arrive after dark sometimes never leave again. A chill ran through Eliza's body. What happens to them? Clara's face paled. I've already said too much. Mrs. Harding would have me dismissed if she knew I was speaking of such things. She fidgeted with her apron. I only wanted to warn you to be careful. The master has shown unusual interest in you. He normally ignores young women from the town entirely. Before Eliza could press for more information, the sound of approaching footsteps silenced them both. Clara quickly excused herself, leaving Eliza alone once more among the watchful eyes of generations of Vanes. That evening, dinner was served in the formal dining room, a cavernous space where a table that could comfortably seat 20 was set for just 2. Candelabras cast flickering light over silver service and crystal goblets, while a fire roared in a fireplace large enough to roast an ox. Outside, the rain had given way to wind that howled around the manor's towers and rattled the window panes like something seeking entrance. Lord Vane awaited her at the table, rising as she entered. He had dressed formally in black evening attire that emphasized his pallor and the unusual silver grey of his eyes. As the meal progressed through multiple courses of exquisitely prepared dishes, Eliza noted that while he moved food around his plate with practiced elegance, she never actually witnessed him consuming anything. His wine glass remained full, despite being raised to his lips several times. "You've been exploring my home," he observed, as servants cleared the main course. "Does it meet with your approval?" "It's magnificent," Eliza replied truthfully, "though I confess I find some aspects unsettling, such as the portraits in the gallery. Your ancestors bear an uncanny resemblance to you." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. Strong bloodlines often produce consistent traits across generations. So consistent that a man from the 16th century might be mistaken for his descendant 4 centuries later, Eliza challenged, emboldened by the direct conversation they had shared in the library. Lord Vane studied her with heightened interest. "You continue to surprise me, Miss Calderwood. Most guests practice the polite fiction of accepting comfortable explanations." "I'm not most guests," she reminded him. "I'm a guarantee of my father's return, collateral in a transaction that involves forbidden islands and ancient rituals." He inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Indeed you are. Which is why I find your courage in speaking directly all the more refreshing." He signaled for the servants to withdraw, waiting until they had left the room before continuing. "What if I told you that death is merely an inconvenience to certain bloodlines? That with proper knowledge and preparation, consciousness may be transferred from a failing vessel to a new one?" The implications stole Eliza's breath. "You're suggesting that you have walked this earth for centuries?" "Yes." He said it simply, as though discussing the weather. "Though the method requires sacrifices that have grown increasingly difficult to arrange in modern times without drawing unwanted attention." Eliza's hand tightened around her fork, suddenly aware of its potential as a weapon should the need arise. "And the ritual you seek to perform at the solstice would eliminate the need for such crude transitions." His eyes gleamed in the candlelight. "The items your father retrieves will allow me to restore my true form, the one I possessed before circumstances forced me into this cycle of death and rebirth in diminished bodies." A terrible suspicion formed in Eliza's mind. "And what role am I to play in this ritual?" Lord Vane's smile was almost gentle. "You misunderstand. I have no intention of harming you, Eliza. Quite the contrary. When I saw you at the Frost Fair, I recognized something in your blood, a dormant heritage that echoes my own. The violet of your eyes is not a common human trait. It marks the descendants of the forgotten houses. Confusion warred with fear in Eliza's mind. What are you saying? That your mother's bloodline traces back to the same ancient source as mine, though greatly diluted through the centuries. You possess potential that has been lying dormant, waiting for the right catalyst to awaken it. The revelation struck Eliza like physical blow. She thought of her mother, beautiful, ethereal, always slightly apart from the ordinary world, and of the strange dreams that had haunted her own childhood, dreams of flying over moonlit landscapes and communicating with creatures that existed between worlds. "I don't believe you," she whispered, though uncertainty colored her denial. "You've felt it," Lord Vane pressed. "The difference between yourself and others, the sense that you perceive more, understand more deeply, the way time sometimes seems to flow differently around you." Each word resonated with experiences Eliza had never shared with anyone, not even her father, who would have dismissed them as fanciful imagination. "If what you say is true," she said carefully, "then why involve my father at all? Why not simply tell me what you wanted?" Lord Vane's expression darkened. "Because the ritual requires items that only one of pure human blood can retrieve. The Temple of Eternal Night recognizes its own. It would never admit me or anyone carrying the blood of the forgotten houses. Your father, for all his virtues, is entirely mortal, the perfect instrument for acquiring what I need." A chill ran through Eliza as she realized the calculation behind Lord Vane's actions. "And if he fails? If the dangers of the Isle claim him, then I shall mourn the loss of a brave man," Lord Vane replied without hesitation. "But the solstice will not wait, and I have waited centuries already. Other arrangements would need to be made." The casual dismissal of her father's life ignited something in Eliza, a spark of anger that burned through her fear. "You speak of him as though he were nothing more than a tool." "All mortals are tools in the greater designs of those who see beyond single lifetimes," Lord Vane said, his tone hardening. "But make no mistake, I fully expect your father to succeed. The captain I arranged for his voyage is experienced in navigating the treacherous waters around the Isle. Bartholomew Calderwood will return, his debts cleared and his business restored. You will be free to return to your life in Blackmere." He paused, studying her face. "Or you may choose another path entirely." The implication hung in the air between them. Before Eliza could respond, a commotion in the entrance hall disrupted the moment. Raised voices echoed through the manor, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps approaching the dining room. Lord Vane's expression shifted from annoyance to alert wariness. The doors burst open to reveal a man Eliza recognized immediately. Baron Rothwell, her father's primary creditor. He was a corpulent figure in his 50s, his face flushed with either exertion or anger, flanked by two servants who appeared to be restraining him with difficulty. "My apologies, my lord," one of Ravenswood's footmen said hurriedly. "The Baron insisted on seeing you immediately, despite being informed you were dining." Lord Vane rose slowly, his posture relaxed, but somehow conveying latent danger. "Baron Rothwell, what urgent matter brings you to my home at this hour, unannounced and apparently unwilling to observe basic courtesies?" The Baron's gaze darted between Lord Vane and Eliza, momentary confusion giving way to a leer that made her skin crawl. "So the rumors are true. You've taken Calderwood's girl as payment for his debts. Your assumptions are as crude as your manners," Lord Vane replied, his voice soft but edged with menace. "Miss Calderwood is my guest, while her father undertakes a commission on my behalf. A commission that has, incidentally, allowed him to settle his obligations to you in full." Baron Rothwell's face darkened. "Aye, with gold that bears no mint mark I recognize. My banker suspects forgery." A terrible stillness came over Lord Vane. "Your banker oversteps. The gold is genuine, from private reserves older than your family name. Then you won't object to my men questioning Calderwood about its source, the Baron retorted. Except he seems to have vanished from Blackmere entirely, leaving only whispers that you've purchased his daughter's virtue with coin of questionable origin. Eliza rose to her feet, indignation overcoming caution. My father has undertaken a trading voyage, sir, and my virtue remains intact. Lord Vane has been a perfect gentleman. Baron Rothwell's laughter held no humour. A perfect gentleman who keeps a tradesman's daughter in his home unchaperoned? The town already talks of nothing else. Mrs. Harding serves as Miss Calderwood's chaperone, Lord Vane said, his patience visibly thinning. Now state your true purpose here, Baron, before my hospitality expires entirely. The Baron's expression shifted to calculation. Very well. I propose a simple solution to these unfortunate rumours. Transfer the girl's guardianship to me until her father returns. My wife will ensure her reputation remains unsullied, and any questions about the gold's provenance will naturally disappear. The suggestion was so transparently self-serving that Eliza would have laughed had the situation not been so precarious. Baron Rothwell's wife was bedridden with chronic illness. His household was notorious for the liberties he took with female servants. Before either she or Lord Vane could respond, the manor was plunged into sudden darkness. The candles extinguished simultaneously, as though a great breath had blown across the room. Even the fire in the massive hearth dimmed to glowing embers, casting the dining room in an eerie red half-light. In that moment of confusion, Eliza felt rather than saw Lord Vane move, a displacement of air, a presence suddenly beside her. Then gone. A strangled cry came from where Baron Rothwell had been standing, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. When the candles mysteriously reignited moments later, Lord Vane stood calmly by the fireplace, straightening his cuffs. Baron Rothwell lay sprawled on the Aubusson carpet, his face drained of colour, a thin line of blood trailing from his temple where it had struck the corner of a side table. The Baron appears to have been overcome by the unexpected darkness, Lord Vane observed to his wide-eyed servants. Perhaps the excitement of his urgent errand, combined with what I detect to be a significant quantity of brandy, has proven too much for his constitution. He turned to Eliza, his expression betraying nothing of what had just occurred. Miss Calderwood, I believe the evening's entertainment has reached its natural conclusion. Allow me to escort you to your chambers while my staff attend to our unexpected guest. As they left the dining room, Eliza glanced back to see Lord Vane's servants, lifting Baron Rothwell's unconscious form. The movement exposed the Baron's throat, where 2 small puncture wounds were visible just above his collar, wounds that had not been there when he entered the room. Lord Vane's hand on her elbow guided her firmly away, his grip cool and unyielding. The Baron will be returned to his estate with no memory of this evening's unfortunate display, he said quietly. But his interference has forced my hand. We must accelerate our preparations. The ritual cannot wait for your father's return. What does that mean? Eliza asked, dread pooling in her stomach. They had reached her chambers. Lord Vane released her arm and regarded her with an expression that mingled regret with determination. It means, my dear Eliza, that tomorrow night you will begin to learn exactly what heritage flows in your veins. The awakening is painful, but necessary. He bowed formally, the perfect aristocrat once more. Rest well. Dawn comes quickly, and with it, the beginning of your transformation. The door closed behind him with the soft click of a lock engaging, leaving Eliza alone with the horrifying certainty that whatever Lord Vane truly was, whatever dark ritual he planned, her role in it had just become far more immediate and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The first hints of dawn filtered through the latticework of Eliza's windows, painting pale fingers of light across her chamber floor. She had not slept. How could she, with Lord Vane's words echoing in her mind? The awakening is painful, but necessary. Throughout the night, she had paced her luxurious prison, searching for means of escape. The windows were sealed shut, the decorative iron too sturdy to bend. The lock on her door had proven impervious to her amateur attempts at picking it with hairpins. Even the chimney was fitted with a grate that prevented passage. As full morning light illuminated her room, Eliza heard the lock turn. Clara entered bearing a breakfast tray, her youthful face drawn with anxiety. "You need to eat," the maid said, setting down the tray and casting nervous glances toward the door. "They're saying Lord Vane hasn't retired to his chambers. He's been in the North Tower all night with those strange books." Eliza seized the opportunity. "Clara, I need your help. Lord Vane intends to use me for some sort of ritual tonight. I have to escape before sunset." The maid's eyes widened. "The ritual of awakening? Then it's true what they say, that you have the old blood." She shook her head. "No one leaves Ravenswood without his permission, miss. The grounds are patrolled by things that ain't dogs nor wolves, but something in between. There must be a way," Eliza insisted. "Secret passages, a forgotten exit. This house is centuries old." Clara hesitated, conflict evident in her expression. "There's a servants' tunnel that leads to the old boathouse by the lake. It was used during the Civil War to smuggle supplies." She lowered her voice further. "But Mrs. Harding has the only key, and she never parts with it." A plan began to form in Eliza's mind. "Could you create a distraction, something to draw Mrs. Harding away from her post, long enough for me to find the key?" "It would mean my position," Clara whispered. "Possibly worse if the master discovered my involvement." Eliza reached for her mother's silver crescent pendant, the only valuable she had brought to Ravenswood. "Take this. It's worth enough to secure passage to London, where you could find new employment far from Lord Vane's influence." The young maid stared at the pendant, temptation warring with fear in her expression. Finally, she nodded. "The household will be at its busiest preparing for tonight. There's to be some sort of midnight ceremony in the North Tower. I'll create a crisis in the kitchen around noon, a fire small enough to control but large enough to demand Mrs. Harding's attention. Her office is at the end of the servants' corridor, the key kept in a box on her desk." "Thank you," Eliza said fervently, pressing the pendant into Clara's palm. After the maid departed, Eliza forced herself to eat despite her churning stomach. She would need her strength. As she finished the last of her tea, she noticed something unusual, a slim volume tucked beneath her breakfast napkin. The midnight blue book from Lord Vane's private collection, Histories of the Forgotten Houses. Clara must have smuggled it to her. Or perhaps Lord Vane himself had sent it, another move in whatever game he was playing. Either way, it represented knowledge, and knowledge was power she desperately needed. Opening the ancient text, Eliza began to read, her scholar's mind rapidly absorbing the archaic language. The book spoke of beings that had ruled the land before recorded history, creatures neither fully human nor entirely other, possessing abilities that defied natural law. They had formed houses, each with distinct gifts. The House of Mist could pass through solid matter, the House of Whispers could speak directly into minds, the House of Midnight could manipulate darkness itself. But most powerful and most feared was the House of Blood, whose members could extend their lives by consuming the essence of others, eventually achieving a form of immortality. They were described as beautiful beyond mortal measure, with eyes the color of winter skies and an allure that made willing victims of their prey. Eliza's hands trembled as she turned the pages. The text confirmed what she had already guessed. Lord Vane was a bloodlord, one who had survived the purges that had driven the Forgotten Houses from power centuries ago, and if he spoke truly about her heritage, she carried within her the dormant potential of these same inhuman abilities. The final chapter described the ritual of awakening, a ceremony performed on those of mixed blood to fully activate their dormant abilities. It required the light of a solstice moon, certain rare components, and the complete draining of human essence from a mortal vessel, a sacrifice. The ritual demanded a human sacrifice. Horror washed over Eliza as she realized the true purpose behind her father's mission. The items he sought were indeed for the ritual, But Bartholomew himself was the intended sacrifice, a pure human whose life force would fuel her transformation. Lord Vane had no intention of letting her father return alive. The manor's clock chimed 11, startling her from these grim revelations. She had 1 hour before Clara's distraction. Moving quickly, Eliza changed into her simplest dress, one that would allow for ease of movement, and gathered what few items might prove useful: a letter opener that could serve as a makeshift weapon, a small hand mirror, and a tinderbox she had noticed on the mantelpiece. At precisely noon, distant shouts erupted from the direction of the kitchens. Smoke began to drift through the corridors, accompanied by the sound of running footsteps and Mrs. Harding's authoritative voice directing the response. When Eliza tested her door, she found it unlocked. Clara had managed that part of the plan as well. Moving with careful stealth, she navigated the servants' corridors until she reached Mrs. Harding's office. The small, immaculate room contained a desk with precisely arranged ledgers and household accounts. As Clara had promised, a wooden box sat atop a stack of inventory lists. Inside lay a heavy iron key with an unusual design. The head formed in the shape of a raven's skull. Eliza pocketed it and was about to leave when her eye caught a ledger labeled Correspondences. Something made her pause long enough to flip it open. There, in Mrs. Harding's precise handwriting, was a record of communications with a Captain James Holloway regarding passage to the Isle of Shadows. The most recent entry, dated just yesterday, read, "Captain reports successful interception of B. Calderwood before reaching destination. Subject secured in lower hold of vessel. Returning to Ravenswood Harbour by midnight. Solstice Eve, as instructed." Her father had been captured, prevented from ever reaching the Isle. He was being brought back to Ravenswood to serve as the sacrifice. The realization sent ice through Eliza's veins, transforming her plan from mere escape to desperate rescue mission. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a false wall in the wine cellar, just as Clara had described. The ancient key turned with difficulty in the rusted lock, revealing a low, narrow passage that smelled of damp earth and forgotten secrets. Eliza lit a candle from her tinderbox and entered the darkness, counting her steps to mark the distance. 300 paces brought her to the end of the tunnel. A wooden door reinforced with iron bands. It opened onto the interior of what appeared to be an abandoned boathouse, its windows boarded over, cobwebs draping the corners. Through cracks in the weathered planks, she could see Ravenswood Lake stretching before her, its waters dark and still in the winter light. Eliza had just begun searching for a way to signal for help when she heard voices approaching outside. Ducking behind a stack of mouldering crates, she extinguished her candle and held her breath. The boathouse door creaked open, admitting 2 figures, Lord Vane himself, accompanied by a rough-looking man in sailor's attire who must be Captain Holloway. The contrast between Lord Vane's aristocratic elegance and the captain's weather-beaten coarseness only emphasized the unnatural quality of the nobleman's beauty. "You'll have the remainder of your payment after tonight's ceremony," Lord Vane was saying, his voice carrying that slight accent Eliza had noticed before. "The prisoner is to be brought directly to the North Tower upon arrival." "Begging your pardon, my lord, but the man keeps asking about his daughter," the captain replied, nervously adjusting his cap. "Says you promised her safety, and she shall have it," Lord Vane replied smoothly. "After tonight, Eliza Calderwood will transcend such mundane concerns as safety. She will become something magnificent, the first awakened blood heir in over a century." The captain shuffled uncomfortably. "The men don't like it, my lord. Bringing a man back for whatever happens in that tower. It's bad luck to spill blood on a solstice night." Lord Vane's laugh held no humour. "Your men's superstitions are quaint but misguided. The solstice is precisely when blood holds its greatest power." He reached into his coat and withdrew a heavy purse. "Perhaps this will ease their troubled consciences." The captain took the purse, his principles apparently less sturdy than his weathered face suggested. "We'll dock at midnight as arranged, my lord." After they departed, Eliza remained hidden, her mind racing. The lake connected to the river that led to the sea, which meant her father would be arriving by boat. If she could somehow warn him, perhaps they could both escape during the transfer from ship to shore. Waiting until dusk fell, Eliza cautiously emerged from the boathouse. The grounds of Ravenswood stretched before her, the manor's Gothic silhouette looming against the darkening sky. Lights had begun to appear in various windows, including an ominous red glow emanating from the highest point of the north tower. Keeping to the shadows of trees and ornamental hedges, she made her way toward the small dock where her father would be brought ashore. The winter air bit through her inadequate clothing, but fear and determination kept her moving forward. Twice she froze as dark shapes loped across her path in the distance, the not-quite wolves Clara had mentioned, patrolling the boundaries of Lord Vane's domain. By the time she reached the concealment of a boathouse near the main dock, full night had fallen. The moon, almost full but not yet at its solstice completeness, cast silver light across the lake's surface. In the distance, Eliza could make out a lantern approaching slowly across the water, Captain Holloway's ship returning with its prisoner. As the vessel drew nearer, Eliza could see it was a small but sturdy craft designed for coastal waters. A crew of about 6 men moved about the deck, preparing to dock. On the foredeck stood Captain Holloway, and beside him Eliza's heart leapt, a figure she recognized instantly as her father. Even at a distance, Bartholomew Calderwood appeared diminished, his shoulders slumped in defeat, his hands bound before him. The sight filled Eliza with equal parts relief and dread. Her father lived, but for how much longer? The ship docked with practiced efficiency, lines thrown to secure it against the wooden pier. 2 crewmen disembarked first, followed by the captain escorting Bartholomew. Eliza strained to hear their conversation. "Please," her father was saying, his voice hoarse with exhaustion or emotion, "let me see my daughter. Lord Vane promised her safety." "That's between you and his lordship," the captain replied gruffly. "My job's done once I deliver you to the tower." Eliza waited until they had moved a few paces from the dock before she stepped from hiding. "Father!" she called softly. All 3 men whirled toward the sound. Bartholomew's face transformed with joy, then immediate horror. "Eliza, run, child! Get away from this place!" The captain cursed, reaching for a pistol at his belt. "How in blazes did you—" He never finished the sentence. A shadow detached itself from the darkness behind him, resolving into Lord Vane's elegant form. With movements too swift for Eliza's eyes to track, he grasped the captain by the throat and lifted him one-handed into the air. "I do not tolerate failure," Lord Vane said conversationally, as though discussing the weather rather than choking a man. "I especially do not tolerate it on this night of all nights." The captain's struggles weakened, then ceased entirely as Lord Vane casually tossed his limp body into the lake. The 2 crewmen backed away in terror, then turned and fled toward their ship. Lord Vane made no move to stop them, his attention fixed entirely on Eliza and her father. "How disappointing," he said, his voice soft yet carrying clearly across the distance between them. "I had hoped to make this evening civilized. A gentle transition for you, Eliza, with your father's willing participation after I explained the honor being bestowed upon his bloodline." "You mean the honor of being murdered to fuel your ritual?" Bartholomew spat, struggling against his bonds. "I heard your men talking when they thought I slept. You never intended for me to return." Lord Vane sighed, an eerily human gesture from a being Eliza now understood was anything but. Murder is such an ugly word for a sacred exchange. Your life force, your essence, would elevate your daughter beyond mortality. What father wouldn't make such a sacrifice? One who knows his daughter would rather die human than live as a monster, Bartholomew replied steadily. Lord Vane's expression hardened. Unfortunately, Miss Calderwood's preferences have become irrelevant. The stars align tonight. The preparations are complete. The awakening will proceed. He moved toward them with that unnatural grace, covering the distance between them in what seemed like a single fluid stride. Before Eliza could react, his hand closed around her arm with a grip like iron. "Your heritage calls to you, Eliza," he said, his pale eyes reflecting the moonlight like mirrors. "Even now, your blood responds to the proximity of a full blood lord. You feel it, don't you? The hunger, the potential, the power waiting to be unleashed." To her horror, Eliza realized he spoke truly. Something within her was responding to his presence. A warmth in her veins, a heightening of her senses that made the night seem brighter, sounds clearer, sense more vivid. Most disturbing of all was the strange attraction she felt toward him, not as a woman to a man, but as a moth to flame, an instinctive recognition of something fundamentally kindred. "Let her go!" Bartholomew lunged forward despite his bonds, driven by paternal desperation. Lord Vane's backhand caught him across the face with such force that Bartholomew flew several feet through the air before crashing to the ground, blood streaming from his nose and a cut above his eye. "Father!" Eliza cried, struggling against Lord Vane's grip. "Bring him!" Lord Vane commanded, and shadows themselves seemed to respond, coalescing into vaguely humanoid shapes that lifted Bartholomew's semi-conscious form. "The hour approaches. We shall proceed to the tower." As he forced Eliza to walk beside him back toward the looming manor, the moon rose higher in the night sky. With each step, she felt that strange awakening sensation grow stronger, her human self struggling against something older and darker that stirred in her blood. "What you feel is only the beginning," Lord Vane said, as though reading her thoughts. "When the ritual is complete, when your father's essence flows into you, you will experience power beyond anything you have imagined. You will thank me for this gift, Eliza Calderwood. Perhaps not tonight, but eventually. We have eternity after all." The North Tower grew closer, its red light pulsing like a malevolent heartbeat against the night sky. Within its ancient stones, Eliza knew, waited the implements of ritual and sacrifice, and her father's death, unless she could find a way to stop what was coming. But even as her mind raced for solutions, that other part of her, the part Lord Vane sought to awaken, whispered seductively of blood and power and endless night. And for the first time since entering Ravenswood Manor, Eliza feared not only for her father's life, but for her own humanity. The torchlight within the North Tower pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, casting grotesque shadows across stone walls stained with centuries of arcane rituals. Eliza, still firmly in Lord Vane's grip, ascended the spiral staircase, each step bringing them closer to the chamber where her father's life would be sacrificed for her awakening. The tower's interior was unlike anything Eliza had imagined. Ancient tapestries depicting blood-drinking ceremonies adorned the walls, while glass cases displayed artifacts whose purposes she dared not contemplate. Curved daggers with blackened blades, crystal vials filled with substances that seemed to move of their own accord, and what appeared to be human bones inscribed with symbols that hurt her eyes to look upon. At the summit, a circular room opened before them. Its domed ceiling was painted with astronomical charts, showing the convergence of stars that would occur at the solstice midnight. In the center stood a raised stone altar, its surface carved with channels that led to a central basin, designed, Eliza realized with horror, to collect blood efficiently. The shadow creatures dragged her father into the room behind them, depositing him roughly at the foot of the altar. Bartholomew struggled to sit up, his face bruised, but his eyes clear with determination when they met Eliza's. "How foolish of me," Lord Vane mused, releasing Eliza to move about the chamber, lighting black candles arranged in a pattern she recognized from the histories of the Forgotten Houses. "I should have foreseen your escape attempt. The blood of the House of Midnight has always been resourceful, even when diluted through generations of mingling with mortals." "House of Midnight?" Eliza questioned, moving carefully toward her father while maintaining distance from Lord Vane. The book mentioned them as masters of darkness. Lord Vane smiled approvingly. You've been reading. Good. Yes, your mother's bloodline traces back to the House of Midnight, while mine is of the House of Blood. A potent combination, wouldn't you agree? When fully awakened in you, these gifts will create an ability not seen for millennia. As he spoke, Eliza noticed the shadow servants arranging items on a small table, the very objects her father had supposedly been sent to retrieve: black orchids with petals that seemed to absorb light, crystals that emitted soft musical tones when touched, and a leather-bound manuscript whose cover moved subtly, as though breathing. You already had the ritual components, she realized aloud. You never needed my father to fetch them. Perceptive, Lord Vane acknowledged. The items were already in my possession, but the ritual requires a journey of intent, a mortal willingly crossing forbidden waters to retrieve objects of power, believing them essential to the ceremony. The intent infuses the items with the necessary energy. Your father's belief in his mission, his willingness to brave those waters for your sake, that was the true purpose of his voyage. Bartholomew laughed bitterly from his position on the floor. Then why capture me before I reach the Isle? Your ritual is flawed. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Lord Vane's perfect features, an unfortunate necessity. The Isle has become unstable since I last visited it. The risk of losing you there was too great. The journey itself should suffice. Should. Eliza seized on his doubt. You don't know if it will work. Enough! Lord Vane's voice reverberated with inhuman power, rattling the glass cases and causing the candle flames to flare. The stars align only once a century. I have waited too long for this moment. He approached Eliza with predatory grace. The hour approaches. It is time to prepare you. From a velvet-lined box, he withdrew a silver chalice filled with dark liquid. Drink! He commanded, offering it to her. This will ease the transition. Eliza recoiled. Blood? Mine, he confirmed. The first communion between maker and heir. I refuse. Lord Vane's expression hardened. Then your father's death will serve no purpose beyond sustaining my own life for another decade. Is that what you wish? To render his sacrifice meaningless? The terrible choice hung in the air between them. Eliza looked at her father, who shook his head frantically. Don't do it, Eliza. Whatever he says, don't let him change you. Lord Vane sighed with theatrical patience. Perhaps a demonstration will clarify matters. He gestured to the shadow servants, who hauled Bartholomew to his feet and dragged him to the altar. You have potential beyond anything you've imagined, Eliza. Let me show you. With a swift movement, Lord Vane sliced his own wrist with a small silver knife. Instead of flowing, his blood moved with unnatural purpose, forming patterns in the air before him. As Eliza watched in horrified fascination, the blood shape solidified into a mirror-like surface that reflected not the room around them, but scenes from her own life, memories she recognized and others she did not. Her mother singing by her bedside, violet eyes glowing in the darkness. Herself as a child, standing in their garden at midnight, communing with shadows that responded to her touch. And older images from before her birth, her mother dancing beneath a full moon, her feet not quite touching the ground, surrounded by figures whose features were hauntingly similar to Lord Vane's. Your mother fled her heritage, Lord Vane said softly, chose mortality and obscurity over her birthright, but she could not escape what flows in her veins, what now flows in yours. Tonight, you will reclaim what she abandoned. Eliza found herself mesmerized by the blood mirror, by the revelation of a history she had never suspected. Had her mother truly possessed supernatural abilities? Had she deliberately hidden Eliza's heritage from her? The clock in the tower began to strike, each resonant tone pulling Eliza back from the brink of fascination. 11 chimes, 1 hour until midnight, until the solstice reached its apex. Decide, Eliza Calderwood, Lord Vane urged, offering the chalice once more. Embrace your true nature, or watch your father die to sustain a power you rejected. In that moment of terrible clarity, Eliza understood the trap Lord Vane had constructed. Whether she accepted or refused the transformation, her father was intended to die. The only difference would be whether his death fueled her awakening or Lord Vane's continued existence. She took the chalice, her fingers brushing against Lord Vane's cold ones. His smile of triumph sent ice through her veins. "Eliza, no!" Bartholomew struggled against his captors. "I'm sorry, Father," she whispered, raising the chalice to her lips. "I have to know the truth." The liquid touched her tongue, metallic, ancient, and charged with power that sparked through her body like lightning. Warmth spread from her center outward, accompanied by a rush of sensations so intense she nearly dropped the chalice. Colors became more vivid, sounds sharper, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. Lord Vane watched her transformation with naked hunger. "Yes," he breathed. "The blood recognizes its own. Already you begin to change." Eliza gasped as new awareness flooded her consciousness. She could sense the life force of every being in the room, her father's bright human vitality, the diminished borrowed existence of the shadow servants, and Lord Vane's ancient powerful presence, a swirling vortex of stolen energies accumulated over centuries. But beyond these immediate auras, she sensed something else, something vast and watchful that lay beneath Ravenswood itself, connected to Lord Vane yet separate, slumbering but stirring toward wakefulness. "What is beneath this house?" she asked, her voice altered, resonating with new power. Surprise flickered across Lord Vane's features. "You sense it already? Remarkable," he gestured expansively. "The true purpose of tonight's ritual, my dear Eliza, not merely your awakening, but the restoration of our kind's greatest member, the progenitor of the House of Blood, imprisoned beneath these grounds for millennia by those who feared his power." Horror dawned on Eliza as the pieces aligned in her mind. "You're not restoring your original form. You're freeing something else, something that's been using you." Lord Vane laughed, the sound both beautiful and terrible. "Using me? I am its most faithful servant, its last loyal descendant. When it rises, our kind will reclaim dominion over these lands. Mortals will once again know their proper place as sustenance for their superiors." "And my role?" Eliza demanded, fighting against the blood-borne power now coursing through her veins, trying to maintain her humanity even as it slipped away. "The final key," Lord Vane replied. "The progenitor requires a vessel of combined bloodlines to fully manifest in this world. Your unique heritage makes you the perfect host for its consciousness, the first in 10 centuries to be capable of containing such power." The realization struck Eliza like physical blow. She wasn't being transformed to join Lord Vane as an equal. She was being prepared as a sacrifice of a different kind, her awakened form to be hollowed out and filled with an ancient evil. Her father must have understood at the same moment, for he renewed his struggles with desperate energy. "Eliza! The mirror! Remember what your mother taught you." The blood mirror still hung in the air, its surface now showing not memories, but the sleeping entity beneath Ravenswood, a formless darkness with countless eyes and a hunger that transcended physical bounds. "Remember what your mother taught you." The words triggered something deep in Eliza's consciousness, not a memory, but an instinct, a knowledge transmitted through blood and bone. The House of Midnight could command darkness itself. As the realization crystallized, Eliza felt power unfurl within her, different from the blood hunger Lord Vane had awakened, yet complementary to it. The shadows in the room responded, stretching toward her like eager pets seeking their master's touch. Lord Vane noticed the shift in the room's atmosphere too late. "What are you doing?" he demanded, moving toward the altar where preparations for the final sacrifice were laid out. "The time approaches. Your father's essence must be released at the moment of perfect alignment." Eliza extended her hand toward the shadows, which coalesced around her fingers like living silk. "My mother may have fled her heritage," she said, her voice steady, despite the pain of transformation still racking her body. "But it seems she taught me more than you realized." With a gesture born of instinct rather than training, she sent the shadows racing across the room. They engulfed the shadow servants, who dissolved with silent screams back into the darkness from which they had been summoned. More shadows wrapped around the ritual implements, extinguishing candles and knocking over carefully arranged symbols. Lord Vane's face contorted with rage and disbelief. "Stop! You don't understand what you're interfering with." "I understand perfectly," Eliza countered, directing her shadows to envelop her father, not to harm, but to shield him. "You would sacrifice us both, my father's life and my soul, to free a monster that would enslave humanity." She could feel the entity beneath stirring more urgently now, disturbed by the disruption of its carefully orchestrated awakening. Its awareness reached toward her, ancient and malevolent, seeking to overwhelm her newly awakened abilities with its vastly superior power. Lord Vane abandoned pretense, moving with supernatural speed toward Bartholomew, a ritual dagger now gleaming in his hand. "If I cannot have the perfect ceremony, I will at least have the essence I need," he snarled. Eliza reacted instinctively. The shadows under her command solidified, forming a barrier between her father and the advancing vampire. Lord Vane collided with it, momentarily rebuffed but quickly recovering. "You cannot maintain such defenses," he taunted, circling the shadow shield. "Your abilities are newborn, undisciplined. Mine have been honed over centuries." He was right. Already Eliza could feel her control wavering, the effort of maintaining the shadow forms draining her limited reserves of power. And beneath them all, the entity continued to rise toward consciousness, drawn by the conflict of powers above. "Eliza!" her father called from within his protective cocoon of darkness. "The mirror! It's still connected to him." The blood mirror still hung suspended in the air, its surface now showing the face of the entity, a visage of such terrible beauty and ancient malice that Eliza could scarcely comprehend it. And as Bartholomew had observed, tendrils of power still connected it to Lord Vane, the blood that had created it linked to its source. In that moment of realization, Eliza understood what she must do. Blood called to blood. Lord Vane's power was in her now, mingled with her own awakening abilities. His connection to the mirror was now partially her connection as well. Gathering her remaining strength, Eliza mentally seized those tendrils of power. Instead of controlling the shadows, she focused on controlling the mirror itself, reversing the flow of energy, pulling instead of projecting. Lord Vane froze mid-stride, his expression shifting from rage to shock. "What are you—" he gasped as the mirror began to draw upon his essence, pulling centuries of accumulated power back through the blood connection. "Stop! You'll destroy us both." "Better that than free what lies below," Eliza countered, maintaining her grip on the mirror despite the agony it caused her. Her newly awakened blood rebelled against what she was attempting, recognizing it as a perversion of its natural purpose. The mirror's surface rippled as it absorbed Lord Vane's power. The vampire's perfect features began to age visibly, skin wrinkling, hair whitening, the immortal beauty fading to reveal the withered creature beneath the facade. He fell to his knees, clawing at the air as though trying to physically reclaim his draining essence. "Centuries," he rasped, his voice cracking with sudden age, "centuries of careful planning." "Ended tonight," Eliza finished for him, feeling the mirror growing unstable as it filled with more power than it was designed to contain. The entity below was fully awake now, its rage at being denied its freedom, pulsing through the stones of the tower itself. With a final surge of will, Eliza directed the overloaded mirror toward the floor and released her control. The mirror shattered, blood and power exploding outward in a devastating wave that tore through the tower room. Ancient artifacts disintegrated, stone cracked, and the carefully constructed symbols of the ritual were obliterated. Lord Vane's final scream was lost in the destruction, as his body, drained of the stolen vitality that had sustained it for centuries, crumbled to dust. The blast knocked Eliza backward, sending her crashing against the wall as consciousness began to slip away. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the tower floor fracturing, opening a chasm down into the depths where the entity raged, and her father, somehow free of his bonds, dragging her away from the spreading destruction. Adrida. Dawn broke over Blackmere, pale winter sunlight illuminating the ruins of Ravenswood's North Tower. Where the proud structure had stood for centuries, only a jagged partial wall remained. The rest collapsed into a smoking crater that occasionally trembled with aftershocks from below. In the Calderwood shop, Eliza sat wrapped in blankets before the hearth, her father tending to a pot of tea with hands still trembling from their ordeal. They had escaped the collapsing tower with minutes to spare, fleeing across the grounds as the entity's death throes shook Ravenswood to its foundations. By dawn, half the manor had fallen in upon itself, burying whatever remained of the ancient evil. "How are you feeling?" Bartholomew asked gently, handing her a steaming cup. Eliza considered the question carefully. The power awakened by Lord Vane's blood still coursed through her veins, muted but present. She could still sense the shadows responding to her presence, still feel the heightened awareness of her surroundings. But the hunger, the predatory instinct he had tried to nurture, had faded, changed, she admitted finally, but still myself. Bartholomew nodded, relief evident in his weathered face. "Your mother always said it was choice, not blood, that defined a person's nature. She chose humanity, despite what abilities she possessed." "You knew?" Eliza asked, surprise momentarily overwhelming her exhaustion. "About Mother, about what she could do." A sad smile crossed his face. "I loved her for who she was, not what she was. She told me everything before we married, her heritage, her flight from her family's expectations. She feared you might inherit certain tendencies. That's why she taught you to focus on light rather than darkness, to find beauty in the ordinary world." Eliza thought of the entity, now hopefully reburied beneath tons of stone and earth, and of Lord Vane's centuries-long dedication to its resurrection. "What happens now if there are others like him?" "Then we'll face them together," Bartholomew said firmly. "But for now, we rebuild, the shop, our lives." He gestured to Baron Rothwell's receipt, proof that their debts were cleared. Lord Vane's gold was real enough, whatever else he may have lied about. Eliza nodded, turning to gaze out the window at the winter sun climbing higher in the sky. She could still feel the darkness within her, the heritage she could never fully escape. But she had chosen, as her mother had before her, to walk in daylight, despite the power night might offer. Outside, Blackmere was coming to life. Merchants opening their shops, lamplighters extinguishing the last of the night's flames, townsfolk already beginning to whisper about the strange destruction of Ravenswood Manor. Life continuing as it always did, even in the wake of encounters with the extraordinary. And if, occasionally, the shadows in the corners of the Calderwood shop seemed to move with unusual purpose, or if Eliza sometimes stood beneath the moon with her eyes reflecting its light too perfectly, well, every family had its eccentricities, every bloodline its secrets. The winter solstice had passed, the longest night was over. And whatever darkness the future might hold, Eliza Calderwood had learned that light could be found in the most unexpected places, even in the shadows themselves.